vibrant, diverse community. And so utilizing this analysis to look at where are the areas where we can encourage more housing is going to be really key. And it can also help the town work with its development partners to look at different sites that it would like to see some activity on and think about how to encourage and incentivize the type of housing it'd like to see in those locations. We're going to talk more about these different development opportunity types and the kind of housing we think makes sense on them later in the presentation this evening. So that is the 10 priority strategies that we're recommending, and we'll be discussing further in our focus groups, breakout rooms in a minute. But before that, I just want to take any kind of questions that have come in. So Christian, do we have any questions on this so far?
Yes, so Janet asked, what are other parts of town? And this was at the very beginning of your presentation, so I'm assuming this might have something to do with the areas that you're looking at. But Janet, if you'd like to post a clarifying question in the chat, that would be great. Catherine asked, how can the affordable deeds that may expire be overcome so that they don't expire?
Great question. First, I just want to say in terms of other areas, the last housing production plan, as well as the Ashland Comprehensive Plan, looked at areas where housing and other kinds of development should be encouraged. And the consensus was really focus on the downtown, focus on areas near the train station, and focus on Pond Street. And so when we look at development opportunity areas tonight, it's going to be based on that work that's already been done. We're going to be focusing on downtown, the area near the train station, Pond Street, and then just outside of downtown, but we'll not be looking at any of the single family residential neighborhoods. Those will be thought about in a much different way. Tonight, we're really focusing on channeling development to the areas that have already been recommended. And then the question about expiring deed restricted units, communities work with the subsidizing agent for those units. It could be the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state. It could be Mass Housing. And they work with those partners to see how they could extend the affordability of those units. But if you're not monitoring them, you don't know that they're going to expire, and you're not going to be able to work with those subsidizing agencies to put a plan in place to make sure that those units don't expire.
Great. So Pam asked, I would love some examples of the other communities utilizing the Shared Housing Services Office.
Sure. So as I mentioned, there's one in Metro North. There's two in Metro West. One is based in Hudson in Metro West, and another is based in Concord, I believe. And these SHSOs, they mainly consist of about 10 to 15 different communities, and they utilize a shared housing planner. But the great thing about it is that you can utilize hours that planner is going to spend based on how much need and demand that you have. So if you have a lot of new units that come in that need to be monitored because you had a development that resulted in many units, you can utilize that planning staff member more. But then if you have another year where demand is down, you don't have this permanent planner on staff. You can just pay as you need. And communities have done some really wonderful things with this capacity in terms of orchestrating programs such as emergency rental and mortgage assistance programs, having affordable housing fairs, connecting people to affordable housing lotteries, and working on plans just like this one. So there's a lot of benefits to an SHSO.
Great. And we actually, those were the questions that we have in the chat. So unless anyone has, just got one, spoke too soon. Mark asked, will shared housing be used as cluster developments?
I wouldn't say that. I would say, having a shared housing service office and the capacity from that staff can help you think about how to encourage different kinds of housing. You could have that staff member work on a cluster cottage housing zoning bylaw to encourage that type of housing.
Great. We don't have currently have any other questions in the chat. I think that you have answered all of them. Deborah just posted, should we wait to use the SHSO instead of a monitor?
I think that the trust should continue with its efforts. They clearly know that they need a monitoring agent now, but in the future, the capacity required may increase. I think someone pointed out if the inclusionary housing bylaw is created, that will create a lot more demand for monitoring, and it will probably be more appropriate at that time to think about increasing capacity and joining or establishing an SHSO. But I don't see those two things being in conflict, and I think the trust should continue with the process of hiring an agent now.
Great. So I'm going to let give us a moment for in case anyone else has a question that they'd like to post. And I am not seeing any. So unless anyone has any other questions to ask, I think I'll turn it back to you, Alex, for the next part of the presentation.
Sure. So that's the presentation on priority strategies. We're going to go into breakout rooms to discuss these further because we want you to have the opportunity to actually ask questions. Unmute yourself and tell us what you think. Everyone here has a lot of great local knowledge that they bring to the table, so we want to get your ideas. If there's something that the town could be working on that's not included as a priority strategy, please let us know, what your ideas are. If you have any concerns about any of these, please let us know. We will make adjustments based on what you tell us. And finally, we want you to be able to ask questions if there's anything about these that isn't clear. And so now we're going to disperse into smaller rooms to have a more detailed discussion about this, and then we'll come back to the main room and do an exit poll to see how you all think these priority strategies stack up in terms of importance. So with that, I would invite Christian to disperse us into our breakout rooms.
So in a second, I'm going to open up all the rooms. The way that this will work is that you'll actually get a notification on your screen just saying that I'm inviting you to join a breakout room. And you do have to click yes. So just putting that out there. If you are having any issues, just stick around in the main room and I'll do my best to help you. All right. So I'm opening all the rooms. Oh, and to answer your question, I have kind of done it randomly. So the breakout rooms the participants are distributed in them randomly. All right. I'm going to open all the rooms. So all of those are open. You should be getting that notification shortly.
Hey, Christian, I thought I was supposed to be in Alex's room. Is Peter going to Alex's room and I'm going to Josh's?
Let me double check.
Just want to make sure we're in different rooms, really.
You are Peter's and Alex, you're and Josh.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. If you are having trouble getting into the breakout room, just let me know. But while everyone's there, I'm going to mute myself and stop my video. So if you are having trouble, please feel free to unmute. I will be here.
I'd rather be in the breakout section.
All right. Back to you, Alex.
All right, let me just go ahead and get our presentation back up. All right. Perfect. So at this point, we're going to share back some of the key themes that emerged from the conversations in each of our breakout rooms. And then we're going to do a poll to ask you and really get it down on the record, which of these priority strategies you think are most important. But first, we'll start with the report back. I'll report on my room, and then Josh is going to report on the room that he led. So in our room, we talked a lot about the strategies, thinking about the importance of inclusionary housing, thinking about how to really use town-owned parcels in a way that's going to provide both public open space as well as housing options where appropriate. There was a lot of conversation about how do we encourage home ownership in Ashland, first-time home ownership. A lot of people have children who aren't able to buy in the town. We also heard that the last forum and in our focus groups. A lot of people just know people who are experiencing the challenges of trying to buy a home in this market. So there's a desire to have a little more focus on that. We did talk about the importance of creating more housing options and realizing more opportunities where different types of housing can be encouraged, and also thinking about, could we use this new tool offered by the state to incentivize starter homes. And we also heard several concerns in the room, pertaining to, is the type of housing that's coming to various different communities going to be appropriate for those communities? Are those communities going to have a say? All of those things very important. Some concern about density and not being, appropriate with the built environment, making sure that the density and the scale is appropriate. And then just thinking about, how does this fit into a broader vision for the town? All of those different things we were considering. And as we get into the next part of our discussion, we're going to be looking more at development opportunity areas. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh to report back on the themes from his room.
Thanks, Alice. So we had similar themes in our discussion. Really, I think the general sentiment that affordable housing is really desired and supported in the town, but that it needs to be done in a strategic way that people will find acceptable when it shows up sort of in their neighborhood specifically. And I think we had a lot of discussion that focused on the affordable housing requirements of 40B and what happens when the community is under the 10% threshold, and how to make progress on the subsidized housing inventory in such a way that is consistent with the town context in a contribution to the town without being disruptive or sort of negatively received by the community. There's also a good amount of talk around sort of clarifying within the strategies the differences between rental affordable units and ownership affordable units, and wanting to see a little more focus on ownership affordable units and ways to help build household wealth and get more families into the wealth creation of home ownership. I think overall, I think from the discussion that the overall set of goals seem to be pretty well supported, and just about, I think, refining their use to respond to the overall vision and context of Ashland.
Great, thanks, Josh. So now Christian is going to put together another poll for us. This poll is going to ask how important you think each priority strategy is. And I'm going to just throw them up on the screen again. The first poll is going to ask about the first 5, and then the second poll is going to ask about the next 5. So do you want to go ahead and start that poll, Christian?
Great. So You should see that poll in front of you now. Much like the first poll, you will need to scroll to see strategies 3, 4, and 5.
Just a quick check on time. We have about 4 minutes left for this section.
All right, seeing some responses roll in. That's good. I'm going to give us 10 more seconds. All right, I'm about to end the poll. All right.
Christian, could you actually, never mind, sorry.
Do you want me to share the results of this poll, Alex?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Great. All right, so as you can see, strategy 1, most people said it was extremely important or very important. Strategy 2, the most amount of people said it was very important. Same with strategy 3, same with strategy 4, and same with strategy 5. So I'm going to stop sharing these results, and I'm going to launch the second poll for strategies 6 through 10. And again, Alex has put those up on the shared screen. Right, starting to see some responses roll in, that's great. All right. I'm going to give us about 20 more seconds to respond to this. Got a handful of people left. All right, 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And for strategy 1, the majority of people, small majority of people responded not, or strategy 6, the majority of people responded not important. Strategy 7, most people responded very important. Strategy 8 was the same. Strategy 9, most people responded with extremely important. And strategy 10, most people responded with very important. All right, back to you, Alex.
All right, thanks, Christian. I just want to say for anybody who said they don't understand the strategy, it really tells me that we need to do a better job of explaining and using language that's easily digestible. And also, I would encourage you to check out my email and the town planner's email at the end of the presentation, and let us know how we can help better explain those strategies that you didn't quite understand. So yeah, let's go ahead and move to the next section. Now, this is a fairly lengthy list of best practices. Many of them are holdovers from the last housing production plan, and so they went through a whole housing production plan back then, and they've been updated a little bit based on the new data that we've gathered, and we've added in a couple But this is a menu of options that the town can look at and choose as opportunities arise. They're not necessarily things that will be worked on in the next 5 years. They're not necessarily things that the town should focus its capacity on implementing right away, but they are things that may be helpful or useful depending on the opportunities that arise in the town. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I'm going to go over them fairly briefly, and I invite everyone to leave your comments and questions about these in the chat. And then what we're going to do is we're going to download your comments and questions from the chat. We're going to review them, identify key themes, and make adjustments with the committee when we take this back to them for their approval. So the best practices, So the best practices, they also correspond to these 5 different goals that we have. They are really broken up into regulatory strategies and best practices, funding best practices, and programming best practices. You'll notice that the majority of them are regulatory because this is the primary leverage and influence the town holds when it's working on housing initiatives through the leverage and the regulatory ability to guide and incentivize different things lies in the zoning bylaw, as well as other things like the building code, and then different kinds of regulatory policies that you could consider putting in place. So I'll give 2 examples from the list here. And again, please leave your comments and questions in the chat. We're going to be looking through that after the meeting. To look at 14, if some folks aren't familiar, an accessory dwelling unit is basically a small housing unit that is on the same lot as the principal building, the single family building in most cases. Currently, Ashland allows that, but it must be internal or attached. You can't have a detached ADU in your backyard. And that's not uncommon. I mean, there are many communities that aren't really encouraging this through their zoning bylaws, but that's because many of these bylaws haven't been updated in literally 30 some years. But basically why ADUs are important is because, when you have, say, a senior household that needs to downsize into something more manageable, and you also have the issue of that same household's children not being able to afford to live in town, it could be a great option for parents to live close to grandparents and have those grandparents nearby to help with their grandchildren. It's a great intergenerational living option for families that want to be able to live close and support each other, but also have the autonomy of their own housing unit and their own space. It can be coupled with design guidelines to really make sure that there's no negative impacts on the neighborhood visually or in terms of parking. You can require like parking in the driveway, or you could require design guidelines like, say, a buffer and a bush around the ADU so that nobody even knows it's there. But it's a great way to create more housing options without like really having these big housing developments and so forth. And that's something that the town could encourage through regulatory policies as well as funding policies. The last one on regulatory best practices that I want to get into is the transfer of development rights by law. This is something that you might see more, say, on the county level, but it could definitely make sense for Ashland because Ashland's a community that has great open space and areas that need to be protected. And Ashland is trying to channel new development towards existing infrastructure in the downtown. So a TDR by law can basically give somebody development rights, basically transfer what they could do in, say, an area way far away from downtown where the town would like to preserve open space and allow them to develop somewhere else near the downtown. And so it's a great way to direct new development to existing infrastructure while also preserving areas that are further away and are more appropriate as open space or need to be preserved. So these are the regulatory best practices. Again, they're things that the town can look at and say, does that make sense? Are we doing that? So it's a menu of options that can really be there for quite a while. And so we carried some over from the last plan, and we've suggested some new ones. The next one, these are programming best practices. So you can create programs to help meet housing need. We've been talking a lot about the difficulty of buying your first home. There are state programs that assist with this. The town could advertise those. It could work at making them better or adding an additional program to really help people get across the finish line and buying that first home. You can look at ways to offer your boards and staff training, like, fair housing and educational trainings, to make sure that board members understand that and how they can enforce that. So there's a variety of different options you could look at. 25 is looking at connecting homeowners to energy efficient and renewable incentive programs like Mass Save, where you can weatherize your home to reduce your utility costs, or think about adding a solar panel. Those are examples of programs that are either existing at the state or local level that could be further encouraged through best practice policy. Please leave your comments and questions in the chat. If there are only a few, we can get to them at the end of this part here. So then the funding best practices, a few of those. So this is looking at, what existing funding is out there that we can utilize. I mentioned earlier, if the town adopts this plan, it can retain its housing choice designation and continue to be eligible for many different grant opportunities. There are other opportunities at the state level out there, like MassWorks, which is specifically designed to improve infrastructure, where maybe there's a great opportunity for housing development, but the sewer capacity isn't there. This is a grant that helps communities build up that capacity. So it has to be money for infrastructure that's related to private development that helps housing, economic development, and other community goals. And then the last one on there is a real estate transfer fee. So this is something that you have to ask the state to be able to do. Boston just recently did this. Obviously, Ashland's much different from Boston, but just to say that it has happened, and it's something that's really going to help the city prevent property flipping and people who are exploiting this incredibly hot housing market that also exists in the suburbs, but also to generate some funds that can be used for housing initiatives by, looking at what's going on in the private market and making sure that that is being channeled towards community needs. So we do have quite a few questions and comments in the chat. Christian, if maybe you could pick out like one or two, because I know we have like one more minute until we have to go to the next section. But again, we're going to process all these comments as we look at revising these. So do you want to pick out a couple for us?
So a couple people have asked about TDR. So one person wasn't sure what gets traded for what, and another person wrote, why not just update the zoning for what we want instead of TDR? That doesn't seem to make very much sense.
Sure. I mean, you could update the zoning to try and get at the same thing by channeling development towards the downtown and trying to preserve open spaces. But this is a much more powerful way to preserve the spaces, because if somebody, say, like on the outskirts of town, agrees to a transfer of development rights and then is able to build near the downtown, their property on the outside of town has to be preserved. So it's a powerful way to make sure that areas are preserved while also channeling the development that you'd like to see towards existing infrastructure. But zoning and other things are also part of that. So it's kind of like a combination of different things that you can do to meet your goals.
All right. This isn't necessarily a question, but Pam mentioned that she'd like to see Ashland focus not only on just reaching our threshold of 10% affordable housing, but considering the housing options to be more family friendly and affordable at the same time.
Absolutely. That's a great comment. Thank you, Janet.
And I think in terms of one more question, Mark asked, why only all residential, all electric? Strength and building codes I can agree on. And I'm not sure exactly what, now that I'm reading it, what you intended, Mark. So if you wouldn't mind posting a follow-up comment, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I could just comment and explain a little bit more about that one. So the building code is what regulates the standards of the building, and there is a scale of different standards that make a building more energy efficient. So we're talking about a building that's energy efficient. It means it can run on less power, which means you as the homeowner and tenant pay lower utilities. If you have an extremely energy efficient building, say at the stretch code or passive house standard, you may even be able to think about not having any kind of gas or fossil fuel in your building. It's not talked about a lot, but say like gas stovetops and things, they really impact indoor air quality. And also Ashland, as well as the state, has set goals to reduce fossil fuel emissions. And you may be surprised to learn that about a quarter of fossil fuel emissions actually come from buildings. I mean, obviously single occupancy vehicles and transportation is the biggest detriment to that, but also single family homes that run on gas are really contributing to the problem as well. But you can't transition to electric instead of gas unless you have a building code that's ensuring development is going to be energy efficient enough so that if you're running on electricity, your utility bills don't go through the roof. You need a building that's well insulated, that has a strong building envelope, that has good windows that don't let out air and so forth, and to use new technologies to make sure that the building runs properly and that you have low utility costs. And possibly new development that's at these standards could think about not including fossil fuel infrastructure altogether.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question. Janet asked, can you give a specific example of TDR?
I don't have any specific examples, to be honest with you. I know MAPC is working with a few communities on writing TDR bylaws, so we can follow up with you on that if you're particularly interested in that one.
Alex, I could offer one. We've been working in the town of Littleton to draft such a bylaw, but there's one example in Massachusetts currently of a passed bylaw, which is in Falmouth, Massachusetts. And in that bylaw, they're looking to preserve Chapter 61A, so farmlands and agricultural type lands and water sensitive lands, and send those development rights to more appropriate locations. But I'm not sure if that bylaw has been used by developers, but the examples are relatively rare so far in the state. They're sometimes seen as very difficult and complicated bylaws.
All right, well, we might need to give some thought about that one to see if it really is appropriate for Ashland specifically. But again, these are a list of best practices that the town could look at as things come up and say, oh, should we consider that? We want to focus our efforts there, but they're not priority strategies. They're not things that we think should be focused on strongly in the next 5 years.
All right, so I think we should move on to the development opportunities conversation. There's a couple of other really great comments in the chat, which we will make sure to save and include in the project. Thanks.
Great, we appreciate everybody bearing with us as we're trying to pack in a lot of information into our meeting, but let's kind of stretch it out for a minute. We're going to get into the last part of the meeting, which is really going to focus on what are the development opportunities, what are the locations, what do these opportunities look like, what kinds of housing makes sense in these areas. so that we can think about how can the town use its leverage, its regulatory programming and funding, best practices and priority strategies to help incentivize more housing options in the areas that we're looking at. So to get this conversation kicked off, I want to first just show you the full range of different housing types, and it's listed in order of density. So on the left in the top row is the lowest density, all the way to the highest on the right in the bottom row. We said small lot single family because a lot of the majority of the zoning districts that are single family zoning districts are at 20,000 or more square feet in terms of minimum lot size. And that doesn't usually result in naturally affordable housing because developer can only build one house on a big lot. So it's going to be a big house and it's going to cost a lot of money. So small lot single family can give you better opportunities to get things that maybe a first time home buyer could afford or a downsizer might like to look at. ADUs, 2 families, 3 families. E is an interesting one. Some communities look at bylaws to take large single family homes and allow them to be split into multiple units. Like maybe the first floor is one unit and the second floor is another unit. Making some changes to make that work is a good way to increase housing options without having any impact on the external visual character of the home or the neighborhood. Cluster cottage housing, so having small housing types with shared open space around it. Another great way to get more starter homes and downsizing homes. Townhouses, I'm sure most people are familiar with. That's usually a great option for a first-time home buyer. And then, if you think about Ashland's form-based code in the downtown, it looks at smaller multifamily, mid-sized multifamily, and slightly larger multifamily. So looking at those options, more appropriate for downtown areas where there's existing infrastructure and you want to create more foot traffic. Courtyard developments are a good way to get more housing options. Conversions, looking at buildings and uses that are no longer being used. Is the building good? Could we think about converting it into some kind of housing development? Mixed use with, and I want to say specifically vertical mixed use, where we have housing on top, retail on bottom. Great way to support local businesses by ensuring that there's going to be a consistent customer base there within walking distance, and also creates a more walkable, friendly environment, kind of the nice, New England town centers that we can all appreciate. A big part of that is mixed use, designed in a way that fits the character of that area. And then the last row is working into higher density development. We're not saying that these may not be appropriate anywhere in town, but we'll hear from you tonight to see if maybe some of these could be thought about in specific locations. But essentially, tonight we've been talking about the difficulty for people to afford housing in town. I do want to mention that only 18% of the town's housing stock is rental. People have been talking a lot about the difficulty for first-time home buyers. The same difficulty exists for those who want to downsize. And a theme that has really come up through our focus groups data in the last forum is people that live alone, senior that lives alone, somebody who lives with roommates, somebody who may no longer be married. Very difficult for them to find a home in town. But if you create a range of options, you can satisfy a range of housing needs. And this is what you want to think about. It doesn't have to be a big 40B development that the town reacts to. It can be a proactive plan that says, we'd like to see a greater variety of housing and we'd like to see it in these different areas. And so with the remainder of our meeting, we're going to look at some of the development types, and then we're going to see and poll you on which housing typologies you think make sense on those development types. Before I get into that, I do want to take questions if anybody has any questions that came in the chat on the housing types. Is there any questions on that, Christian?
Yes. So let's see. Yolanda asked, what percentage of each of these types of housing does Ashland have?
That's a very good question. I don't have the data with me offhand, but I can tell you that I believe over 70% of the town's housing stock is single family, but about 50% of that is detached. About 20% of it is attached, like townhouses, but the majority of the stock is single family.
Great. And we just got a couple new questions. So one person asked if this forum will be viewable after. WACA is recording, so you will be able to view it that way. Mark commented, small lots fits cluster only if buffer zones work together. Mixed use is great for small office on the bottom. And I'm scanning for additional questions.
While you do that, I did pull up the data on the town's housing stock. Great. This is something we really focus more on in the first forum, but 57% of the stock is detached single family, and 20% is attached single family, like townhouses and condos. Together, 78% of the stock is single family, 3% of the stock is duplex, 8% is 3 to 4 unit buildings, 3% is 5 to 9 unit buildings, less than 1% is 10 to 19 unit buildings, and then 5% is 20 units or more. We're seeing this really across the board. It's really referred to as missing middle, where you have a large percentage of large single families, and you have a pretty good percentage of large multifamily buildings, but you don't have the middle. Duplexes, 3 to 4 unit buildings, all of these different housing options that aren't big single family homes, but then also aren't big multifamily homes either.
All right, so we have a couple of comments just of note. One is that the town of Bellingham is currently offering a tiny housing projects being developed by the Fafford Company, and that I think is in relation to a previous comment about hoping for tiny housing to be considered part of this. And that one person wrote, keep in mind, commercial space in new projects may not be reasonable due to the pandemic. Many commercial spaces along Route 126 are empty. Let's try to fill those units before we build other spaces.
Okay.
And then, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think we do need to move on because we have just a little more time left here, and I want to make sure we can get through the polls. I just want to make everybody aware that in the last housing production plan and the Ashland comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2016, they identified zoning districts in the downtown and near the downtown, as well as the Pond Street corridor, as where new development and housing should be encouraged. And so we are following that guidance that was already established when we were looking at development opportunities. We did an analysis of properties in all these different areas, and we came away with different development opportunity types, which I'll show you in a minute. But I want to make it clear, we did not look at any single family residential areas. So on this zoning map, none of the yellow areas, but the colorful areas in the downtown or near the downtown, that's where we focused on. Same thing in the Pond Street corridor, only things along that corridor, not the single family areas. But these are the main areas where our analysis focused because of the groundwork that was laid in the last housing production plan and the comp plan. From this, we have come away with 4 different development types. So we have properties that are in the downtown that are small, meaning they're plus or minus 1 acre. Properties near the train station, which are also small, plus or minus 1 acre. And then additionally near Pond Street, plus or minus 1 acre. And then the 4th type is just outside of the downtown, not in the single family areas, but kind of just outside of the downtown, where we're seeing medium and large size properties of 3 to 10 acres and then 10 acres or more. So this is how we've categorized the different development types. And what we're going to do through the remainder of the meeting is to look at different housing that may be able to be encouraged here. And we're going to ask you what you think about that through a couple more polls. So we'll do it for each of the different development types. The first development type is in the downtown, a lot of small parcels nearby. We have recommended that any of these housing types may be appropriate. They're just recommendations. We're going to ask you which ones you think are most appropriate in this area. And if there's a housing type that's not on here, write it in the chat. So with that, Christian, can you open up the poll to ask folks which housing types they think make sense on development opportunity type 1, which is in the downtown, small parcels of plus or minus an acre.
Right, we've got some responses. Give it maybe a few more seconds. All right. If you haven't answered yet, make sure you submit. Okay. So now I'm sharing the results. Looks like there is a lot of answers between 40 and 67%, but the one that received the most amount of responses was mixed use.
All right, let's go to the second development type, which is locations near the train station. So again, like if you're thinking about that, people are often looking for housing where they can walk to the commuter rail or get to it easily. So this is development type 2, also small parcels plus or minus 1 acre. These are the housing types we have suggested. We want to hear what you think about them, as well as if there are any that should be included here. So with that, can you launch poll 2?
Great. All right. Still have a few folks who haven't responded. Keep it open for a little bit more. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. So like the last one, a lot of the responses were clustered around the sort of 50 to 70% mark, but the response that had the most for this question was multifamily.
All right, and just a quick note on time, we have just 6 minutes left, so let's go on to the next one. All right, and this one is small properties near the Pond Street corridor. Here are the suggested housing types. We want to see which ones you think make the most sense, and if there aren't any on here that you would like to see, please let us know in the chat.
Great. Right. I'll leave the poll open for just a little bit longer if you're still working on it. Okay. I'm going to end the poll in just a second. Share the results. In this poll, the response that received the most amount of, or the choice that received the most amount of responses was mixed use.
All right, we'll move on to the last development type, which is type 4. And that is medium and large sized parcels that are just outside of downtown. Some of the new ones that we've suggested here, the cluster cottage housing in the courtyard type, which we haven't suggested on the other areas. So go ahead and launch that poll, Christian. And if there's something here that you think would make sense that's not here, please let us know in the chat.
Right, keep it up for just a little bit longer. Right, closing the poll now. All right, so this one had a pretty clear winner, and that is cluster cottage.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts with us on that, as well as the priority development strategies and the best practice strategies. The next steps, we will be taking all of the great input that you've given us tonight and think about some of the adjustments, changes, and additions that we want to make to these recommendations to really take in your ideas as residents who understand your community very well, and also address the concerns that you've raised as well. We'll be taking these back to the steering committee. They will review everything and will approve a draft plan that we will put forward to the Ashland Select Board and Ashland Planning Board. They will review it and vote on whether they'd like to adopt it with changes, or not adopt it. If it is adopted, it will be sent to the state for review and certification. And at that point, we will begin the technical work on the inclusionary housing element of this project. So please do go to ashlandmass.com/848/housing to stay connected with this project for the upcoming engagement opportunities. We will have 2 events similar to this one to continue to get your input on that portion of the plan. And then if there was anything that you had questions on, or we could help you out with by doing a better job of explaining, please feel free to email either Peter, the town planner, Emma, the assistant town planner, or myself. It has been a pleasure speaking with you tonight, hearing all your thoughts and comments, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you and have an excellent night.